Hello everyone, this is Carbonomics. Now, the world, especially the Western world and North America and Europe, is racing towards dramatically reducing its carbon emissions. 2030 climate goals are quickly approaching, and renewable energy or electric vehicles aren't going to be enough to get us where we need to be. And this is where the carbon markets come in. Now, voluntary carbon markets, or VCMs, are going to be crucial to fill in the gaps that other emissions reduction measures simply cannot. Like the emissions-intensive steel or cement industries, and we can't just swap those processes out for electric versions. It's not that simple. Or the fact that so many consumer products in one way or another need petroleum to be created. And this is just a small list right here. VCMs address climate change through the creation of a financial incentive for companies to develop emissions reduction projects that can either reduce or sequester emissions from the atmosphere. This could be through a reforestation project where the trees eat up CO2 through photosynthesis, or direct air capture, another example, where technology is sucking up and storing that CO2 underground in many cases. And those are just two of a variety of options for carbon projects in the space. But let's answer this central question more specifically. What are the voluntary carbon markets? Well, in contrast to compliance carbon markets, which I've covered in previous videos, link in the description, companies are entering the voluntary carbon markets voluntarily to buy carbon credits or offsets to reduce their emissions on their own. And the voluntary carbon markets refer to any marketplace or over-the-counter trading for emissions reductions. Whereas in compliance markets, the government is essentially forcing companies to buy carbon allowances. But what are carbon credits or carbon offsets? Many times you'll hear these terms used relatively interchangeably by people talking about the industry, but they aren't actually entirely synonymous. Carbon offsets are a certification that represents 1 ton of CO2 that was removed from the atmosphere. Offsets are generated from carbon projects like the reforestation or direct air capture projects I mentioned earlier, which actually take CO2 out of the atmosphere. And this is different from a carbon credit, which represents a ton of carbon that has been reduced from being released into the atmosphere. A carbon credit can be produced by projects like ones that distribute efficient cook stoves in developing regions, for example, which reduce the amount of emissions released into the atmosphere, not removing any emissions itself, though. Now, these carbon credits or offsets can be used to reduce the level of emissions associated with a particular company. A heavy emitter, like a steel or cement manufacturer, can go into the voluntary carbon markets and buy credits from an emissions reduction project, thereby reducing their own carbon footprint by offsetting their emissions with said credits or offsets. And this is likely how companies will be able to reach net zero, where a company is net emitting 0 tons of CO2 into the atmosphere, because the emissions they cannot get rid of through new technology or other means, they can offset with tools like this. Now, with that said, we've talked about some of them already, but let's go into detail on all the various participants and stakeholders found in the voluntary carbon markets. First, we have the emitters, or carbon credit buyers. These are the companies voluntarily entering these markets to offset their carbon footprint, likely buying credits from carbon project developers. Some big buyers so far have been the big tech companies like Apple or Microsoft buying up carbon projects, and others being the big oil companies like Shell, Hess, and more. But next, we have the carbon project developer, which will build out a cook stove, reforestation, or other types of projects to generate carbon credits or offsets, which can then be bought up by investors, brokers, or buyers like we mentioned above. There are a few public investment options to actually invest in carbon project developers right now, which I will cover later in the video. To have those carbon credits validated and verified, project developers need to submit their projects and specifications to a major standards body, like Verra, Gold Standard, or the American Carbon Registry, which are the top 3. These are nonprofit organizations that develop slightly varying rules and standards on project methodologies. Validation refers to the project meeting the requirements of a standards program, and verification means the outcome claimed by the project has been achieved and recorded. So a project was built out and reduced emissions as much as it said it would. Next up is auditors. To ensure that the details behind a project are up to an industry standard, auditors are brought in to confirm a project's documentation. After a project is verified and validated, the generated credits can then be sold to various market participants. The obvious one being the various companies looking to offset their emissions, but there are also carbon brokers or retailers, which can buy up credits or offsets to then resell to other corporations, like a typical broker in the equities markets in a way. So brokers are one way for companies to find credits, but infrastructure is emerging to provide more standardized trading of credits and provide better price signaling. And that's going to be through carbon exchanges. A lot of trading is done over the counter currently in offtake agreements or other closed deals, but exchanges like Air Carbon or Expansive are developing projects to create more fungible futures and other easily tradable products. And lastly, on the end of the list, we have investors like ourselves, either trying to buy up credits on our own or investing in the companies that participate in these markets. So now that we know all the various stakeholders in these markets, how big are they? Well, the VCMs are currently valued at around $2 billion as of the last estimates. The Task Force on Scaling Voluntary Carbon Markets, which is sponsored by the Institute of International Finance, estimates the market may 15x or more by 2030, with an estimate the markets could be worth upwards of $50 billion. So there's a strong potential, in my view, to find significant investment upside by positioning ourselves right now. And keep in mind, you remember how there are mechanisms to control the price rising too quickly in compliance markets? Well, those mechanisms don't exist in the VCMs. There is no mechanism to control how high prices of credits can go in these markets. So how do we invest to expose ourselves to this level of upside? Well, there are several possible investment buckets for existing options right now. There are carbon credit royalties, which is how I'm personally investing in this space. But there are also public carbon project developers and carbon credit or offset ETFs. For the ETFs, there's just one for carbon offsets at the moment, as most of them are tailored towards compliance markets. And this is with the ticker KSET, which is quite a small fund right now, trading around $2 million. And on the project developers front, the main two public options are going to be Climate X Development, KLX, and Big Tree Carbon, ticker BIGT. And lastly, we have the carbon credit royalty companies, the largest of the four being Carbon Streaming, or NETZ. Then we have DevStream, ticker DESG, Star Royalties, ticker STRR, and Base Carbon. And this is the only public investment option I currently own shares of myself. And there are quite a few videos on this channel about this company if you want to learn more about it. But yeah, that is going to be the end of the video here. If you want to see a complete list with more detail on all the investment options for carbon credits, offsets, and allowances in the VCMs or compliance markets, I will link to this video, How to Invest in Carbon Credits in 2023, in the description below, which covers just that. Thanks for watching.